Lockwood. Amy's from Murdoch University in Western Australia, where she has done her PhD looking at lambing density, so stocking rate and mob size. She has now finished her PhD and taken up a postdoctoral research position, where she's focusing still on lamb survival. So I'll hand it over to Amy just with questions. If we could please just hold them over till the end of the session. I'm sure you'll have plenty to ask, much as the last group did. So yeah, we'll just hold questions till the end so that Amy can get to her presentation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Grace. Great to have you all here today, and it's great to be here from WA. So as Grace mentioned, I've been involved with this mob size stocking rate work for the last few years throughout my PhD, and I was supported by MLA and a graduate research training program. So today we'll be having a bit of a look at lamb survival, why we want to improve lamb survival, and then moving on to some producer surveys that were run through the Vessel West Land program a few years ago. We'll then touch on the National Learning Density Project, which Grace mentioned, and we have a few of the people that run the sites here today, as well as Jason Trott from Lyndon Hugill, who are co-managing the project. We'll then move on to a couple of studies that we've run in WA as part of my PhD, to really look at the effects of mob size on ewe and lamb behaviour and lamb survival, but we'll focus on some interesting findings we got there over two contrasting seasons. And we'll end with some key messages. So lamb mortalities represent a major source of reproductive wastage within the Australian sheep industry. On average, at least 25% of lambs born will die prior to marking, and about 80% of these deaths occur in the first 2 to 3 days of life. These losses are estimated to cost the industry close to $1 billion each year, so are really a focus for improving lamb survival within the industry. Survival of merino lambs is poorer than that of our non-merinos, and that's partly related to their poorer or lower birth weight and their poorer vigour, but also the poorer mothering abilities of merino ewes. Nationally, we're sitting at about 86% for marking rate for our merinos and 108% for our non-merinos. Economic modelling has shown that improving the survival of twin-born lambs is the highest priority for improving reproductive performance within the industry, so that's where a lot of our lamb survival research is focused. So when it comes to allocating ewes to mobs at lambing, we have our lifetime ewe management guidelines, which recommend that we preg scan our ewes and separate out our singles and twins so that we can optimise maternal nutrition and therefore ewe and lamb survival. So we optimise maternal nutrition through managing condition score. Ideally, we want our ewes in condition score of 3 at lambing, and also through management of feed on offer or food. There is some recommendations around paddock characteristics. So for example, shelter. We know that providing particularly our twin-bearing ewes to well-accessed paddocks with well access to shelter, that it can improve lamb survival by reducing the chill index the lambs experience. However, that shelter does need to be effective and obviously also utilised by the ewes. We also obviously have a risk of predators. And there's currently no or very little evidence to support recommendations to you around the impacts of mob size and stocking rate on lamb survival. So that's where this presentation will focus. So at the time of lambing, ewes are attracted to the birthing fluids and other newborn lambs, and that attraction can result in disturbance events which may result in mismothering of lambs, and obviously poor lamb survival, but also it can result in dystocia due to that disturbance of the birthing process. So obviously with a higher mob size, we're going to have more ewes lambing per day, particularly in our twin-bearing mobs, and that is likely to present a greater risk of mismothering or disturbance at the time of lambing and may compromise lamb survival. So this is some drone footage that we took on Jason Trott's farm a few years ago through some funding through AWI. And basically what you can see here is U140 has had one lamb. She's got this foreign lamb that's following her around everywhere, being quite annoying. And she's in labour with her second lamb. U180's had 2 lambs and she's in labour with her third. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of disturbance happening. That foreign lamb, the foreign ewes, they're all laying on top of each other. They don't know whose lambs are whose. So these are the types of events that we may expect at higher lambing densities or high mob sizes, which could result in both dystocia or mismothering of lambs, and therefore poorer lamb survival. So U140 actually goes on to have a dead lamb because she took so long due to all that disturbance from that foreign new and foreign lamb. So a few years ago, Bessel Beslan, in collaboration with Agriculture Victoria, ran some funding from MLA, ran some surveys which we've analysed to have a look at the effects of mob size and stocking rate on lamb survival. So this slide focuses on the survival of twin-born lambs. So for our twins, we saw for each extra 100 ewes in the mob at lambing, survival decreased by 3.5%. So marking rate decreased by 7% for each extra 100 ewes in the mob at lambing. Regardless of birth type, we found that lamb survival decreased by 0.7% for each extra ewe per hectare. So a significant effect of both mob size and stocking rate on lamb survival. Particularly interested in that effect of mob size, given our priority is improving the survival of twin-born lambs. So if we compare that 3.5% difference in or decrease in lamb survival for a mob of 100 compared to 250 twin-bearing ewes, that equates to a difference in lamb survival of just over 5%, or a difference in marking rate of just over 10%. And the relevance here is the current recommendation to you as producers is that you should be lambing twin-bearing ewes, adult twin-bearing ewes, between a mob size of 100 and 250. So as you can see, within that range, we could be getting a difference in marking rate of over 10%, which is a huge difference and really highlights a scope to improve lamb survival by managing mob size and potentially stocking rate at lamb. So these surveys led on to the National Lambing Density Project, which has been funded by AWI and MLA and involves several collaborators across Southern Australia. So the research has been carried out on 70 farms across Southern Australia, so WA, South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, over 3 years. So we're currently in our final year, finishing off the remaining 9 sites, so we've completed 61 sites. And these sites involve adult twin-bearing ewes of either merino or non-merino breed on each farm. And basically they're split into 4 mobs. So we have a 2x2 design, so a high or a low mob size and a high or a low stocking rate. And the hypothesis we were testing is basically that the poorest survival will be in our high mob size, high stocking rate group, and the greatest survival will be in our low mob size, low stocking rate group, based on our findings from the Bessel Beslan surveys. So this map just shows you where our research sites have been located over the past 2 years. In black are our merinos, in grey are our non-merinos. So in WA we've been 100% merino with a bit of a mix over in the eastern states. So in terms of data collection, we have 2 main visits onto the farm. The first is around 140 days after the rams went in, so about 10 days before the ewes are due to start lambing. And that's when we split the ewes into their 4 mobs. We condition score a subsample of ewes in each mob to determine their average condition score, and we also assess food in each of the 4 paddocks. We then come back at lamb marking. We count the number of lambs in each mob so we can determine lamb survival based on our preg scanning data. And again, we condition score those ewes and assess food. We've also recorded information around the paddock characteristics, so things like shape, topography, access to shelter, and the number of watering points. So this table just shows you the average mob size and stocking rate for each of our high and low treatment groups across our 61 sites that have been completed. So as you can see, not much difference between our merinos and our non-merinos. Our low mob size has typically been around 95 ewes, our high mob size around 240 ewes, and our stocking rate for the low treatments has generally been between 5 and 6 ewes per hectare and 7 to 8 for our high stocking rate. So these mob sizes and stocking rates are largely reflective of the high rainfall and sheep week zones. What it doesn't capture is some of the larger lambing mobs which are run at lower stocking rates in our lower rainfall zones, but there is currently an expansion of this project which is quantifying the impacts of mob size in our larger mobs in lower rainfall zones at a constant lower stocking rate. So in terms of condition score and food at lambing, so on average ewes were in great condition nationally over both years, so 3.1 was their average condition score, and food was a bit variable but based on season, but averaged around 1,500 kilos, so some quite good conditions on average nationally. In terms of lamb survival, we found that higher mob sizes but not stocking rates reduced lamb survival. So survival was lower in our merinos compared to our non-merinos, which is what you would expect. And survival of lambs in the low mob size groups was just under 3% higher than that in our high mob size groups. So that equates to a difference in marking rate of just under 6% between those two mob size treatments. We didn't see any significant effect of stocking rate on lamb survival, so it suggests that reducing stocking rate is probably not going to be an overly effective strategy in terms of improving lamb survival. So if we graph up that effect of mob size on lamb survival, in the solid line is our non-merinos and the dotted line is our merinos. So as you can see, reducing mob size improves lamb survival, and the slope on that line is basically a 2% decrease in the survival of twins for each extra 100 ewes in the mob at lambing. So reducing mob size by 100 increases the number of lambs marked in each mob by at least 4 lambs. So just to recap on our surveys and our on-farm research sites, we've either seen no or a small effect of stocking rate on lamb survival, which suggests that it's probably not going to be an effective strategy for improving lamb survival within the range that we've run our experiments on, so between 2 and 11 ewes per hectare. We've found that lower mob sizes improve lamb survival, and for our on-farm research sites, this effect was a 2% decrease in survival of twins for each extra 100 ewes in the mob. So an extra 4 lambs by reducing mob size by 100. And this effect was consistent between our merinos and our non-merinos, so it indicates that it's consistent across breeds. And also for our ewes that were in condition scored between 2.8 and 3.5 at lambing. So when ewes are in good condition at lambing, doesn't matter what breed, reducing mob size is going to improve lamb survival. To just touch on a couple of experiments we ran in WA as part of my PhD. So these trials were run in Pingelly, which is about 2 hours east of Perth, and we had merinos lambing in winter, so late June, early July. We had 2 contrasting seasons. In 2016 we had a really great year. Food levels were above 2.5 tonne at lambing. Last year was quite tough. We had food levels of less than 400 kilos at lambing, and we were feeding throughout lambing. Despite those differences in seasonal conditions, the ewes were in good condition at lambing, averaging over 3. With our ewes last year, there was a bit of extra conditioning based on the poorer feed conditions. So these trials are mainly aimed at looking at differences between mob size in terms of ewe and lamb behaviour, so looking at those disturbance events. We didn't find too much around the ewe and lamb behaviour, but did find some interesting results in terms of survival. So in 2016 we had merino ewes of either single or twin burrow ewes, which landed at mob sizes of 50 compared to 130 ewes. These ewes were synchronised for joining, so they lambed over about 2 weeks, so under a natural mating those mob sizes are probably a bit higher. As I said, food levels were above 2.5 tonne per hectare, and under those conditions we saw no effect of mob size on lamb survival for either our singles or our twins. In comparison, last year, under our poorer seasonal conditions, where food levels were less than 400 kilos, we were trial feeding throughout lambing and also had hay available. We had twins only, lambing at mob sizes of 55 versus 210 ewes. And we found that the survival of twins in those mobs of 55 ewes was just over 6% higher than those in the mobs of 210 ewes, so just over a 12% higher marking rate. So that's a huge increase in survival, and indicates that there could be a relationship there between mob size, food and lamb survival. And that effect of mob size on lamb survival last year was equivalent to a 4% decrease in survival of lambs for each extra 100 ewes in the mob. So it's a bit higher than we saw from our national project, and again indicates that there may be something to do with the food or seasonal conditions. So just in terms of factors which may influence the benefit of reducing mob size on lamb survival, so based on our work in Pingelly, lambing in autumn when you've got less feed available, or in poor seasons, there may be a greater benefit of reducing mob size on lamb survival in comparison to lambing later in spring or when we've got deferred or high food levels. The size of your lambing mobs and the proportion of twins. So obviously if you've got more twins and you're reducing their mob size, you're going to improve lamb survival to a greater extent as if you had a high proportion of singles. The availability and size of your lambing paddocks, so whether or not you have currently got some smaller paddocks that you can split ewes into for lambing, or whether you're going to need to put up some temporary or permanent fencing. And your proportion of pasture compared to crops. So obviously with our singles in particular, there is the opportunity to lamb onto crops given their low risk of metabolic disease. But again, that will influence the ability of you to split up your mobs. Whether or not you can use that temporary fencing for other purposes on farm, or if you've got a split lambing, you can use it 2 times throughout the year. Obviously you're going to pay off that cost of fencing a bit quicker. The other point is that when we reduce our paddock size and obviously lambing our ewes in smaller mobs, we're not only going to improve lamb survival, but we'll also improve pasture utilisation. So there's a double benefit there in terms of both feed utilisation and lamb survival. So key messages, number 1 is that we want to be preg scanning our ewes and splitting them into singles and twins so we can optimise maternal nutrition and improve ewe and lamb survival, which has been shown to improve lamb survival over the last 10 or so years through the lifetime ewe management work. We're now looking at additional strategies that we can implement to improve lamb survival. So we're aiming for a 5 to 10% increase within the industry, and one of those strategies could be to reduce mob size at lambing and overall improve market rate. So it's about really developing a bit of a package in terms of how we can achieve those additional benefits in terms of lamb survival on top of managing our ewe nutrition. Thank you.
What's the average marking percentage for twins in both merinos and crossbreeds, and what's the average and how high do you think you can go with crossbreeds?
So the average within our project was about 70% for our merino twins, and about 75 to 80 for our non-merino twins. Ideally we want to be getting at least above 75% survival within our twin mobs and above 90% for our singles. So there's still definitely a lot of scope there, and obviously, there's a huge number of factors which influence lamb survival. So it's a complex thing to manage and to achieve those improvements, but we've got a lot of opportunity and scope to improve, particularly just even through further adoption of preg scanning practices, given only about 30% of people actually scan at the moment. So we've got a lot of work in terms of managing ewe nutrition, and then it's about achieving that additional 5 or 10%, which is what we're targeting as an industry.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I guess the recommendations around smaller mob size have been around for a while, and they're sort of well accepted, and I'm probably sitting here a bit surprised that the differences weren't bigger, but we need this evidence, which is great. What about just food on its own? Same stocking rate, same mob size. Have we got much evidence around what impact just food by itself has on lamb survival of twins?
So the question's about food levels and lamb survival in twins. Remember that one. So food levels, the optimum food is around 2 tonnes. So in terms of lamb survival, higher food levels may actually compromise survival if we're getting excessively high because of other issues like abscesses and that sort of thing. And obviously low food levels are going to compromise survival because ewes aren't getting their optimal nutrition throughout lactation and labour pregnancy. I haven't done too much myself in terms of food and lamb survival, but I know around 2 tonnes is optimum. And obviously...
is it one thing I'd love to get clear, is it a bigger impact though than mob size?
Mob size is only quite a small effect, so it's the same as increasing condition score at lambing by about 0.1 to 0.2. So it's a small effect. It's not going to be, provide you 10% increase in survival unless these mob size by food interaction is actually there. So we would like to do some more work around whether or not at low food levels there's a greater impact of mob size on survival, which has been indicated through our work usually. Obviously managing food, and that's obviously linked heavily with maternal nutrition, is going to be the key focus in terms of survival. So managing our nutrition is going to be forefront, and then things like mob size are just achieving those additional 2 to 3% increases in survival.
Thanks.
Just genetics and the mothering ability of the sheep. Is that
Where's that fitting?
Yeah. So the question's around genetics and mothering ability of ewes and lamb survival. So merinos are poor mothers overall. They don't, particularly with our twins, they often leave one behind. And so there's a high incidence of ewe and lamb separations in twins, which results in mismothering. So genetics is, I guess mothering ability isn't something that's highly easy to select for, and it's not. Lamb survival is heavily influenced by the environmental conditions, so it's not something that can be improved rapidly through genetic selection. But yeah, we do have some differences in breed, particularly with merinos because they all want to flock together. So we were expecting that we might have got a breed difference in our national project between our merinos and our non-merinos in terms of the effect of mob size, because obviously we would have expected that our merinos are going to all stick together, and so their lambing density or the density of lambs being born within a certain area of the paddock would be higher compared to our non-merinos that are more likely to spread out. So there are definitely differences between breeds or genetics in terms of behaviour, and that does influence lamb survival, but it's really about sort of more so nutrition and managing sort of management factors.
The ability of the ewe to absorb enough food to support the two lambs.
Yeah. So in terms of feed intake to support
feed intake to support the two lambs.
Yeah, so the question's around feed intake and lamb survival. So food, as I mentioned, food levels are optimal around 2 tonne, and that's where feed intake by the ewe is optimised or maximal. So above 2 tonne, they're not really going to be able to eat anymore. And obviously with twins, the 2 fetuses are taking up quite a bit of room, so they don't have a lot of capacity to fill that rumen up. So their feed intake is going to be a bit lower on a day-to-day basis than our singles or dry ewes. I haven't personally done a lot of work around feed intake and lamb survival, so I can't really answer your question in too much detail, but obviously, yeah, twins have a lot of capacity to consume feed, and with really short feed, obviously, they're going to be really limited in what they can actually consume.
So there's nothing about lamb survival on that portion of the work.
In terms of lamb survival and feed intake.
There's a relation of food intake, yeah, the ability to take in that amount of food that's needed for nutritional requirements.
Well, there's a lot around nutritional requirements in lamb survival, so obviously we want our ewes to be in good condition. Less than 3, they're going to be compromised in terms of lamb survival, so it's really about getting them to good condition before lambing, so that when we allocate them to go and lamb in their paddocks, they've got enough feed there, and that they're in good condition to start with, so they will drop off a bit between lambing and marking. But it's really making sure that they've got enough feed on the ground, or if you're feeding throughout lambing and starting in good condition.
Have you noticed whether there's any influence of the proximity to roads and vehicle movements to lambing?
Yeah, so the question's around proximity to disturbances, I guess, vehicles, other things happening on the farm. With our national project, we made the aim of the 4 paddocks to be similar, so similar proximity to disturbances like roads, that sort of thing, and same with the other work. So yes, they can, disturbances from either humans or predators can influence lamb survival. It's more about sort of disturbing that ewe-lamb bond, and potentially does influence lamb survival, but there's not a whole lot of research around those sorts of events happening and lamb survival.
Following on from that, so obviously a lot of areas are up and in through nancy, so is there any correlation between trial feeding and that has a higher incidence of lower lamb survival, or is it just got feeders in the paddock and bringing in?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up regularly, so it's whether or not self-feeders or trial feeding is better in terms of lamb survival. I can see Steve's having a bit of a giggle over it. So this is something we had to have a good think about in terms of our national project, whether or not we were going to use trial feeding or whether we were going to use self-feeders, and it's really controversial which one's better, and there is actually no solid experimental evidence to support it either way. Based on my own observations, particularly from our lambing season last year in WA, where we had really low food levels and we were trial feeding. Obviously, when you drive into the paddock with a trial feeder and the ewes are hungry, they're going to go straight to the feeder and they'll leave the lambs behind. They may not go back to them, they may go back to them, particularly with our twins. Whereas if you have a self-feeder in there that's got feed in it, obviously, the ewes can go at their leisure. So whether or not one is better than the other, it's still quite controversial. Some people go self-feeders, some people say trial feeding is better. I guess it's what works with your sheep, what they're used to. But I'm sort of leaning towards self-feeders. But yeah, it's something I'd like to work around myself.
Any other questions?
Yep. Just with scanning merino ewes from twins and singles, while separating all your twin-bearing ewes, would that increase the percentage of mismothering?
So the question's around increasing mismothering because of just separating out your singles and your twins. So you're talking about having one big mob of twins, or yeah. So obviously, yes. It is likely to increase the risk of mismothering if you're landing your twins in huge mobs, which I guess is where this work comes in. Reducing our mob size is going to improve lamb survival, and that's most likely because we are reducing that risk of mismothering. So we want to scan our ewes and separate our singles and twins because that's how we can manage their maternal nutrition according to how many fetuses they're carrying, and that is number one in terms of managing lamb survival or improving lamb survival. And then it's about achieving sort of an additional 5 to 10% increase in survival through additional strategies, such as reducing mob size. So we don't want to be landing our twins in huge mobs. We do want to definitely split them up to reduce that risk of mismothering.
Authorised by Victorian Government, 1 Treasury Place, Melbourne.